So we went back to the range this past weekend, and I wanted to share with you guys the drills I did to practice at longer range and 100 yards, because I don't have access to a long range, but I still need to practice like I do. So I wanted to share with you guys what kind of exercises I'm doing. Now, you definitely have to get a little creative to make this work, and so I think I've gotten into a bit of a rhythm, but I wanted to share with you guys anyway, and also would love to hear from you as well. For you more experienced long-range shooters, how are you practicing, or how do you suggest I practice longer range shooting when I only have access to about 100 yards? I'd be really curious to know, so let me know. With that being said, you still, as I mentioned, can be creative, and I still think there's some fun involved too. How do I actually make things work? And regardless, at the end of the day, as long as I'm having a good time and learning something, it's all good. Like, I'll take that to be the win for me, and this past weekend at the range was no exception. So let's take a look at a few things that I've tried that seem to be working for me, and also some things that maybe, I think you can kind of leave it, maybe don't really need to practice that as much. So one thing that I have noticed from my time shooting, farther out, whether it's with the MPVO that I recently got, or in, previous videos when I shot my M16 with the ACOG, is that I'm definitely not as steady-handed as I thought I was when I shoot. The magnifying optic really kind of reveals to me how much my sights sway, as much as I thought I was actually, really steady. So when I'm looking through my, aiming down my sights, I see my crosshairs move a lot. So that's definitely something that stuck out to me that I'm trying to work on more. And so initially I was just shooting prone at 100 yards with like the rear bag and a bipod, but I found that was 100 yards is still too close for that. It's like too easy, in my opinion, to be worth your time unless you really are just starting out with shooting that kind of stuff. So instead, what I did is I started to use a ladder as an alternative, which I found has actually worked quite well. It teaches me how to, gives me a brace that I can still use to practice my bipod and just overall be more stable. But also still is not so stable that it almost feels like I'm cheating. And so I found that using the ladder works, and it's also teaching me how to shoot in uncommon positions for me. So I'm used to shooting just standing, or sometimes even just from sitting at a bench like your typical outdoor range. But shooting in the crouching or kneeling position, where the ladder isn't the perfect height for me, also teaches me how I can shoot from non-standard positions. Having this ladder was a nice happy medium between having something that was stable enough for me to use, where I could, really kind of focus on using my equipment to my advantage, but not so stable that I felt like I really wasn't learning much, like shooting prone with a bag, as I mentioned, with 100 yards. So the ladder was a nice happy medium for me. The ladder is also a very common household tool to use too, so it's not like I had to spend more money to get this. It was just something that was around at my disposal. And so in keeping with the spirit of using what you have, this was the perfect excuse for me to use it. Now, what I did find challenging is because the ladder was a little slick on its surface because it's metal, I still had to find a way to make sure the bipod wasn't moving. So I would use my hand to grip both the bipod leg and the actual, the ladder as well, to make sure I was very stable. But even when doing this, again, I noticed that my crosshairs would still sway a lot. So it still really gave me the opportunity to practice my breathing, my sight alignments, and then also my trigger control as well. Things that became very apparent to me as I cranked up the magnification, that my crosshairs were moving a lot. So as you can see here in this footage, even though I have a really nice clean sight picture because the reticle's minimalist and there's just nothing obstructing my view, you can see how the crosshairs still move a decent amount on those white index cards that I'm using. And using the index cards I thought was a pretty neat trick that I found on YouTube. It gave me a nice blend between, a smaller target, so I did have to focus on being, on getting those tighter groups, but it was still generous enough, especially at a distance like 100 yards. It still let me have a big room for error, which, you could say is good or bad. But it was still better than shooting at the entire IPSC target or the entire, EMOD green target that I have up there. Again, it's also a very low-cost method of getting some extra practice in. I don't really have to spend a ton of money. I think I got 300 cards for like $6 or something off Amazon. So it worked perfectly for me. So using what I have at my disposal. Now, I don't think the index cards will be like a long-term solution if I'm really looking to tighten up my groups, but it still works really well in the meantime, especially for someone who's a little bit on the, the starting out end of shooting at longer distances like me. So I still think it's a great tool to use, but, it may not be, the hardest thing out there. But for me, at my stage, it's great. Practicing with the ladder gave me that stability, but it still let me to practice, the fundamentals of making sure my breathing was okay, making sure I was really holding the rifle properly so I would minimize my sway. But it also taught me how to shoot in positions I'm not too comfortable with in, prolonged times, at least for me. I found that, because I'm usually sitting at a bench or a prone instead or standing, shooting while crouching is not something which is as new to me, especially when using something on like a ladder. It's not something that I'd done before this range session. So that was another pretty cool thing I got to practice. I think I finally started to get the hang of, what kind of crouching position I want to be in. Kind of like what I mentioned in my previous video when I used a proper barricade that the range supplied. Using the ladder instead helped me really understand not only what is the most accurate position, but what is the position I can really be comfortable sitting in for a while. Once I got comfortable doing this, I did also switch it up a little bit and tried to shoot 2 index cards on the same target as well. That way I can practice a little more with kind of a little more movement and reacquire my sights after I've shot, so I have the recoil, and just understanding how much to move my scope and my sights when I'm shooting with a magnified optic. That was something which, wasn't very hard, especially because coming from my red dot, I would move in between targets, but it's still something that I want to practice as well. I will say for the casual shooter like me, this probably is not something that I would need to do all the time, but it's still a nice skill to practice anyway. And again, in keeping with the spirit of using what I have at my disposal, it's an exercise that I decided to do. One trick I learned was to just shoot at the lower index card and let my rifle's recoil naturally raise my sights to the top index card instead. And that way I wasn't really struggling to always reposition and refine my, my stance. When I was shooting, I would just let the rifle do the work. And so I found that to be a nice way to just kind of naturally acquire my sights for my next target as well. That was a pretty cool thing that worked too. And on the note of recoil, I also, kind of more for fun, but also, I'll say it's an excuse for training too. I did also do some double taps as well, shooting twice in a row, quick succession. That way I can really kind of get used to seeing how my rifle behaves, how its recoil is making my rifle behave, so I know how to adjust my targets the next time. Again, I think for the casual shooter like me, I anticipate that eventually when I finally do get out to longer ranges to be able to shoot, I'm not going to be doing any kind of quick follow-up shots or anything. Maybe if I eventually do some kind of competition, I will, but I think in the meantime, it's really not the most necessary, but it is fun to try. And so this is an exercise I'll still do, which is literally just shooting at an index card, twice quickly to reacquire my sights. But it's still something I'll do every now and then. So those are 2 exercises that have worked for me. It's basically using the ladder to shoot just once at an index card so I can really hone in and really focus only on my fundamentals of breathing, gripping my rifle properly and really bracing against my shoulder so I have the most stable rifle possible using my bipod as well. That's a very isolated exercise, which I found is really good for me to be able to use now. I don't need to throw in a bunch of different variables to really get some value. The second thing when I'm comfortable with that is actually shooting, at different targets or different index cards, or shooting twice in a row, like faster shooting, to really understand how my rifle's recoil makes, my rifle behave. And also how I can get back on target faster. And otherwise, that was it. It was kind of a short and sweet range day. It's definitely getting a lot hotter here in Texas. And so I think coming from the colder weather and now suddenly it was like low mid 90s, I had a bit of a shock. So I didn't stay out as long as I had hoped. But it was still a good time. I think, I'm a little limited with how much I can do at 100 yards. But at the end of the day, I still had a lot of fun. It was still really good to go anyway. So, I had a good time. So I consider it a win. But again, I would really like to hear from you guys. If I am trying to practice shooting out to, greater than 100 yards, let's say 300, 500, 600, how do I go about doing that given my, current range setup? I would really love to hear some kind of techniques or what I could do. It does seem like all the ranges in my area make me practice to shoot farther out, which I totally understand, but it's still a limitation that I have. So I'd really like to hear some feedback if you guys have any. But I think moving forward, I'll probably just continue with those 2 drills. I am also getting the itch to shoot the ACOG again. Love the MPVO. I do like it a lot, but there's something that I miss about shooting the M16A4 clone with that Trigicon ACOG. It's just such an awesome gun, so I might do that a little bit more too. So that'll do it for now. Those are 2 drills I'll keep doing. The third is something I probably won't do anymore. But at the end of the day, we had fun, still learning, and still have found things that I can do to practice like I'm shooting at longer distances. So appreciate any feedback. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys in the next one.